Hey there. Okay, this should be our final video, I think. What we're going to be working on today is conclusion. Now, typically, when we think of a conclusion, we actually think of a full paragraph, and we are going to do this as its own paragraph. However, we're really only going to write one sentence. You're welcome. As you get older, each grade level you go up, you're going to have to write more. So at this point, we're really only focused on one sentence. Could you write two? Heck yeah, knock yourself out. But don't feel like you have to. We want you to have a solid conclusion statement. And so I realized when I was planning this that the initial page I sent out to a lot of you looked like this. Let me pull it up. It had, here, this is from the other video. Let me get rid of that. It had like this general layout. But I realized that really I was focusing on the body paragraphs, and I don't have our topic in here, and I don't have our conclusion in here, which is fine. So I'm going to give you a choice. If you're using this note taker, you can just add another box, and you can do that pretty easily by pushing enter. I mean, not enter apparently, tab. Look, each time I push T-A-B, tab, on my keyboard, it adds a new one. So you could just add a new box and write conclusion in there, if you have this note taker. If you do not, and you're using the one from Ms. Mittag's class, that looks more like this. Let me pull it up this one. I believe at the bottom, no, she does not have a conclusion on here. Ooh, so you could write it below all your boxes. You could write it on the side. Just make me know where it is. Like, help it be clear for me. So if you're writing a conclusion over here, then maybe you should say conclusion and then write it. Not like that, please. So you could tell me, oh, that's the conclusion. Or maybe you're putting it over here, which is a little more obvious. Cool. Or maybe you're putting it down here, but just let me know where your conclusion is, please. Make it a different color or tell me conclusion and then write it. Oops, oh my gosh, I didn't want to do that. Okay, so tell me where your conclusion is. It depends a lot on what note taker you're using, but as long as you make it clear, great, you're fine. Now, what is the goal of a conclusion? Well, luckily, a conclusion is relatively simple. A conclusion, let me go back to my page here. That's my kind of like my teacher focus page. Kind of gives you an overview of what every paragraph needs. Remember, as you go up in your grade levels, the expectations change because we are building you up to being writers that are going to write more and more and more and more and more. So, you know, you start really small in kindergarten and you move up in first, move up in second, move up in third. So each year, if your teacher changes their expectations, it's because we are building on the previous year. So this year, really only 1 to 2 sentences is okay with a conclusion paragraph. Normally, we wouldn't say anything less than 3 sentences as a paragraph, but we want you to see that it is broken up into its own area and that it's its own little section. And next year, you'll be writing more sentences for this spot. And what do you need in a conclusion sentence? Well, it says you need a conclusion sentence. A conclusion sentence summarizes what your whole essay is about. So summarizes means basically tells it to me again in a new way. Simplified, usually, a very simplified version of what you wrote about in your whole paper, because you're not going to rewrite the whole paper, take you all day. So when you think of a summary, you want to simplify. You want to take something this big, make it something this big, which is the part that's a little hard, I guess. Usually, this is the nice thing, usually it's very similar to the topic sentence, which is up here in your introduction, but reworded. So important. Don't copy it exactly because that makes your writing sound boring. And always add a bit about the big ideas too. In fact, I would recommend it. Every year I see it, students will copy their topic sentence exactly in conclusion, and they say the exact same thing. That tells me you didn't put a lot of thought and time into it. So writing isn't supposed to always be easy. It makes you think. That's the challenge. So how I would start when I was doing a conclusion, I would probably go back to my topic. I know if you were in my class from the get-go here on this project, we used, let me find it. We used this initially. We had like a topic in here, and we had a box for conclusion. You can put it here too, but eventually I'm going to want it all on the same page. That's why I said, maybe just at this point, just move it on to this note taker instead, because you're going to have to move it over there at some point anyway. But you could go back to this page to find your topic. If you were in mid-tag or tranche, I think your topic is somewhere else. My class would have been in here. And if you were in Mrs. Yamamoto's group, yours would also be in a different place. That's what makes this project hard. There's like 4 different things happening at the same time. At the end of the day, though, you're going to find where you wrote your topic, and you're going to look at it and you're going to say, what did I say? What you should have said is something about, this essay will be discussing the history of spice, or would you like to know more about the history of spice, right? Something that says what we're going to read about is the history of spice. You could have said, this essay will discuss the history of spices by talking about uses of spice, trade in business, and power, if you wanted to incorporate the big ideas in there. If you didn't do that, that's okay too. I remember saying to my class, just make it interesting, make it engaging, make the reader want to read about spice, even if that's not their thing. Conclusion is less important than the topic because they've already read the whole thing. What the conclusion really does is it sums up your point. Like, what was the point of you writing all of this, right? I like to think about the conclusion is like the cherry on top of the sundae, or the bow on top of a gift. It's like that last final piece that wraps it all together. Okay. What you shouldn't do is write the end. Don't do that. Okay. There are some simple books that might do that occasionally. It's kind of out of fashion though now to really just end a book that way, unless they're trying to be a little old-fashioned or a little ironic with their ending. You definitely don't ever want to do that with an informational writing piece, though. That's not a thing that should happen. So don't write the end. Don't write, I'm done. None of those. You want to think back to all your stuff and think, okay, if I could put all this in one word, what would I say? In conclusion, what? Well, look back and what were you trying to say? You were trying to tell about the history of spice, right? In conclusion, the history of spice, what? You could say the history of spice was fascinating, or the history of spice is a long and detailed one. I don't really like that, but I couldn't think of another one off the top of my head. See, this is the thing. If I was writing this paper, doesn't matter what grade level, this is something I would probably rewrite many times, because your first idea isn't always good. I hated those 2 conclusions I just said. They would work, but they weren't very good. And so sometimes I think people just want to get this done and they put the first thing that they can think of down. I'm done. But you're supposed to rework when you write. It's not always supposed to be good right away. Otherwise, we wouldn't need editors and we wouldn't need people to rework. I mean, even the most wonderful authors of all time have to rework their work. So what I recommend is like write your first thought down and then tweak it, which means like fix it a little bit. So you want to summarize your whole thing. So you could say something about like, in conclusion, the history of spice, I'm going to write down that first idea I had, was long and fascinating. First of all, I think I need to say, in conclusion, the history of spice that's fine. I'm okay with history of spice, but I don't like long and fascinating. I'm trying to say like, oh, it's been really interesting, and it's something that didn't happen just over one period of time. It's happened over thousands of years. Maybe that's better. See? Listen to my thought process. The history of spice spanned, that means went over, thousands of years and thousands of miles. There we go. That's what makes it So fascinating. Aha! See, there it is. Way better than the last one. The last one sounded clunky and weird. In conclusion, the history of spice spanned thousands of years and thousands of miles. That's what makes it so fascinating. Not bad. But if you don't want to get too tricky with it like I just did, you can get simpler and just say there were many things about the history of spice, like trade and business or uses. Or in conclusion, this paper was talking about trade and business and uses of spice. Because remember, I said you could include your two kind of big ideas. Some of you had three big ideas. So you could also say the history of spice included many components, like how they were used, how spices were traded, and the power spice gave to civilized or to ancient people. In conclusion, the history of spice included many components like how they were used, how they being spices, how spices were traded, and the power spice gave to ancient people. Notice I mentioned uses, I mentioned trade. I didn't say trade and business because they kind of go hand in hand. And power, I mentioned all three. And I summarized the paper. So that's a more of a restate, essentially. You could make it less fancy too. You could literally say in conclusion, the history of spice was fascinating, or whatever. Pick your own words. This would probably be a 2, and I'll tell you why, because you don't include anything about uses, trade power, or trade, business, and power. You don't include anything about that. So if you really want a 3, you may want to do that. And you can do it in 2 sentences too. You could say, as you saw, or as the paper states, trade or uses, spices were used in many ways. Traded through two major ancient civilizations, because it was Rome and it was the Asian trade through the Silk Road, and created many power struggles. So I've now done it in 2 sentences instead. In conclusion, the history of spice was fascinating. Okay, that would have been a 2 by itself. So now I'm like, well, if I really want to include restating my big ideas, I'm going to do it as a separate sentence because otherwise it's going to sound crazy. As the paper states, spices were used in many ways, traded through 2 major ancient civilizations, and created many power struggles. The end. You don't have to put the end, but that's the end. So you can also do it in 2 sentences. Your first just being a general conclusion statement. Your second, restating your 3 big ideas, or your 2 big ideas if you only wrote 2 body paragraphs. So think about it like this: a general wrap-up statement, very much like a topic. It says what it was about. It was obviously about the history of spice, so say something about that. Okay. If you just said, in conclusion, the history of spice, that is not a complete sentence. The history of spice, what? So think about the what, okay? Because we need to have a verb or a predicate in our sentence. So if you just said the history of spice, we don't have any kind of action word or helper word. We need some sort of a verb. So in conclusion, the history of spice, what? If you want to state your 3 big ideas there, great. If you want to make that a second sentence, also great. Then you could say, the paper stated, or the paper discussed, or my essay discussed, and then restate those 3 things. It's a little tricky, so continue to look at my example. Please don't copy it exactly, though. I want you to get your own ideas in there. So if you're like, well, wait a minute, like where do I find conclusion sentence starters? Because all you use, Mrs. Croteau, was in conclusion. Well, what could I do? And let me show you. We have this little page. It should be on your literacy helpful posters. I'm on my teacher page, which is why it's in a different section right now. You can use any of these. In conclusion, to summarize, finally, to wrap it up, in summary, in summation, excuse me, all in all of these things are like ending statements. So first of all, that helps signal the reader, oh, we're done, okay? We're wrapping up, I get it. And then it also helps you to remember to restate what you already said and bring it to a close. There are very fancy ways to do this. There are very, very, very simple ways to do it. But again, you really want to try to have two if you can. One works too. I'd love to help you if you need more help, but I want you to focus on how do I restate my topic and the big idea of the whole thing, and how do I restate my three big idea sentences in one sentence. Okay, you don't want to go to, because if you get into 3 or 4 here, then you might get to the point where it's like you're just rewriting your entire essay. You don't want to do that. Take your whole essay and simplify. Sometimes it's the hardest part for people, but don't overthink it. I'm telling you, do not overthink it. Write it down first. Did you notice how I had to write and then fix? I think sometimes people wait for this perfect idea to come inside their head, and then it never comes and they get writer's block. Just write the first thing down. It might not be good. You wouldn't believe how many times I've written something down and it's not good at all. That's the point of going back and looking again. And after you've had a little time, sometimes you have to walk away, come back. After you've had a little time, you might go, oh my gosh, finally I've got it. I know what to do. Yes. Okay. So write down the idea, fix it after. Okay. Good luck.